My name is Lainey Jared, and this is my informative speech. Take a moment and picture yourself in the early 1930s, when the Southern Plain region was hit by an insufferable drought, complete with severe dust storms. Your house is covered in dust. You are inhaling large amounts of dust every time you breathe. Your livestock is dying. Your crops are failing. This is a historical event that I'm learning about in my history class. It seems so long ago, but in reality, it was barely less than 100 years ago. Many of our grandparents and great-grandparents lived through this event called the Dust Bowl and watched as their loved ones and livestock withered away to nothing. They also watched as their crops failed, and there wasn't much that they can do about it. By 1934, nearly 35 million acres of what had once been crop-yielding farmland was essentially useless. At the same time, another 125 million acres were losing what little topsoil was left. These crops were a way of life, and usually the only source of income for many families. With the loss of their livelihood, many families began to leave the state to look for other opportunities. It is estimated that nearly 440,000 people left the state of Oklahoma in search for a better life, in places as far west as California. However, for some of us, our Okie roots run deep. Our family stayed and began to work with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which was then known as the Soil Erosion Service, established by Congress under the Franklin Roosevelt administration. One of their goals was to develop new methods to help farmers overcome the soil erosion problem that brought on the Dust Bowl. It is generally believed that the Dust Bowl was an ecological disaster brought on by the overuse of the land. At the time, there was little known about the topic of soil conservation, so the farmers didn't know any better. They had no idea that they were destroying their land in an effort to provide food for their families. Now, here we are, nearly a century after the Dust Bowl, and my generation is facing another crisis regarding the land that we are farming. On top of soil conservation concerns, the United States has an increasing population. The increasing population means increased demand for land to use for commercial and residential purposes. More people also means more mouths to feed, but with more land being used for commercial and residential purposes and less for agriculture uses, this is a seemingly impossible task to accomplish. Not to mention the land currently available for farming is at risk of being overused in an effort to meet the product demand by the United States. How in the world is my generation supposed to feed itself and others without farmland? That is where hydroponics comes into consideration. This farming method allows farmers to grow their crops without the use of soil. Hydroponics uses only water and nutrients to grow their crops. Crops grown on hydroponic farms are less vulnerable to freezes and droughts and pests or diseases, usually transmitted via soil. Another benefit of farming through hydroponic practices is the elimination of growing seasons. Since farmers will be able to grow their crops year-round, they can expect an increased production and yield. As with any other method of farming, hydroponics is not the perfect solution. It does have its flaws. For starters, the increased humidity is the perfect climate for fungi, which could ruin the entire crop. Plus, the errors in hydroponic farming can be quite a bit more expensive than traditional farming methods. But researched rightly and done correctly, hydroponics is an amazing alternative to traditional farming. One of the most exciting things about hydroponic farming is the idea that it could allow us to farm in outer space someday. Approximately 15 to 20 years ago, NASA began working on developing farming practices for outer space. Hydroponics is one of the methods they began to investigate. They initially began researching this farming method as an alternative food source for astronauts out on mission. This practice would allow them to grow food in outer space, which means they can haul less food on the spacecraft. This provides several benefits all around, including making sure they are fed. NASA has also released data on the benefits of hydroponic indoor farming, such as plants use less than 1% of water than traditional farming methods. 2 acres of indoor farming produce similar yields to a 720-acre outdoor farm. These indoor farms can be placed on the space station, the moon, Mars, and many other places in space. At the end of the day, it is inspiring to see the progress we have made since the days my great-grandparents had to watch their crops wither away to nothing. A generation that was faced with so many challenges and hardships, they did not think farming would be able to sustain them until the next week. let alone the next century. Yet here I am, generations later, learning about all the new ways I can grow crops without all the resources my ancestors once thought were necessary. I'm living in a generation where hydroponics is slowly coming to a forefront, as we do what we do best, working efficiently and thinking clearly. Thank you.